Fear is something every person knows. The Buddha himself spoke of it. Even he, in the years before his awakening, sat alone in the forest and felt his heart pound at the smallest sound. So when fear visits you, know that it is simply part of being alive. Tonight we explore freedom from fear. Fear may still come and go, the way weather moves across a sky. But Zen wisdom teaches us that we can learn to be free of its grip. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. We will move slowly together through old stories and reflections and discover what the Buddha and the Zen masters have long taught about the nature of fear in our lives. There is nothing to achieve here and nothing to get right. You only need to listen and breathe and let understanding arrive in its own time. So make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath grow slow and easy. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. Long ago, before he was called the Buddha, there was a young man who left a comfortable life to search for the truth. He went into the forest to practice alone. He sat through long nights beneath the trees. He walked the narrow paths between them, hour after hour, with no one beside him and nothing to distract him. And he was afraid. He tells us this himself, in his own words, handed down to us across the centuries. While he sat in the dark, a branch would settle, or a deer would step on a dry leaf, or a bird would stir in the bushes. And his heart would beat a little faster. A wave of fear would rise in him, and his body would grow tense and uneasy. He could have run. That is what fear wanted. When the fear came while he was walking, it urged him to leave the path at once. When it came while he was sitting, it urged him to get up and move away. But he made a simple decision. He chose to stay. If the fear arose while he was walking, he kept walking until it passed. If it arose while he was sitting, he kept sitting. He did not struggle against the fear, and he did not obey it either. He let it rise, let it move through him, and watched it fade on its own. This is the man who would become known as the most peaceful being the world has seen. And even he, on his long road, once sat in the dark, uneasy at the sound of a bird in the leaves. There is real comfort in this. If fear could visit the Buddha, then fear is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It does not mean you have failed, or fallen behind, or that you are weak. It is simply part of being a living creature. Every one of us has known it. And tonight we begin, slowly, to explore how we might live a little more free of its hold. When we look closely at fear, we notice something. Most of the time, fear is not about what is happening now. It is about what might happen. It runs ahead of us into the future. It takes one small thing and slowly makes it enormous. A soft sound in the night becomes someone at the door. A small ache in the body becomes a serious illness. A short, cool word from a friend becomes the end of a friendship. The mind takes a single seed and grows a whole forest of worry from it, and then it goes to live inside that forest, as though every tree there were real. Buddhism offers us a kind and steadying truth about this. The Buddha taught that all things are impermanent. Everything that arises also passes away. This is true of the seasons, and of our thoughts, and of our joys, and it is just as true of fear. Fear is not a wall we must live behind forever. It is more like weather. It gathers, it darkens, it moves through us, and, when we allow it, it goes. There is a teaching in Zen that the mind is like water. When the water is calm and still, it shows the moon and the trees just as they are. When it is stirred and troubled, it gives back only broken, shifting shapes, and we forget that the shapes are in the water, not in the world. Fear stirs the water. A soft and patient attention lets it grow still again, and then we begin to see clearly once more. The Buddha pointed to this many times. So much of our suffering, he taught, does not come from things as they are, but from the way we see them through a troubled mind. Wisdom, in his teaching, begins with something very simple. It begins with seeing things as they truly are, rather than as our fear has painted them. In the days when the Buddha taught through tales of forest animals, he told of a small hare and a wise old lion. In a wide and peaceful forest, there lived a little hare. She was a tender-hearted creature and a worried one. She liked to rest through the warm afternoons beneath a tall, spreading tree, its high branches heavy with ripe fruit. One afternoon, she lay among the cool roots, half asleep. But her mind, as it so often did, kept turning. She was wondering what would become of her. What if the rains did not come this year? What if the forest changed and the good places were lost? What would she do then, all on her own? And just as that worry passed through her, far above her a single ripe fruit came loose from its branch. It fell softly down through the leaves and came to rest on the ground, a little way from where she lay. The hare did not look to see what it was. In her half-dreaming, worried state, one thought filled her mind, and she believed it at once. The earth is breaking apart. And she began to run. She left the tree and went out across the forest, her small heart beating fast. She passed another hare who looked up and asked her, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" "The earth is breaking apart behind us," she said, and she did not slow down. The other hare did not pause to look for himself. She had spoken with such certainty that he simply turned and went along with her. Before long, there were several hares moving together. A group of deer, seeing them pass, grew uneasy and asked what the matter was. "The earth is breaking apart," came the answer, and the deer joined them. The worry moved from one animal to the next, the way a worry does. Soon many of the forest creatures had left their resting places, none of them quite sure why, each one trusting that the others must surely know. Not one of them had seen anything at all. Each was hurrying along only because another was hurrying, and because somewhere ahead, someone had spoken those few uneasy words. Now, on a sunny rise of rock above the trees, there lived an old lion. He was strong, yet he was not proud, and most of all he was calm. He watched the animals leaving their homes and moving away, further and further into the deep forest, wearing themselves out, troubled by something none of them could name. He could see that they would soon be lost and tired, far from everything they loved, and all of it for a reason no one could point to. So he came down from his rock and walked, without hurry, to meet them. He did not chase them, and he did not alarm them. He simply stood in their path, calm and steady, until they slowed and gathered before him. "Where are you all going?" he asked. "The earth is breaking apart," said the animals. "And who saw it break?" asked the lion. They looked at one another. None of them knew. "The deer told us," said some. So the lion turned to the deer. "Did you see the earth break open?" "No," the deer admitted. "The hares told us." And so the lion went on, patiently, from one animal to the next, asking the same simple question each time. "Did you see it yourself?" And each one pointed further back down the line, until at last they came to the small hare at the very end. "Did you see the earth breaking apart?" The lion asked her kindly. "I heard it," she said softly. "I was resting under my tree, and I heard it come down right beside me. I was sure the ground was splitting open." The lion looked at her without a trace of blame. "Come," he said. "Show me the place, and we will look together." The hare did not want to go back, but the lion was so calm and so unhurried that she found a small courage she had not known was in her. She walked with him to the foot of the tall tree where she had been resting. And there, on the soft ground, lay a single ripe fruit, fallen from a high branch in the warm afternoon. The lion did not laugh at her. He simply let her see it with her own eyes. The hare looked at the fruit for a long while. The thing that had emptied half a forest, the great danger that had set so many creatures moving, was one piece of fruit resting there on the earth. The lion walked back with her and told the others what the two of them had found. One by one, their breathing eased. The fear let go of them, and the animals, who a little while before had been ready to leave their whole peaceful world behind, simply turned and made their way home. The hare made a mistake we all make. She heard a sound, and without ever looking, she believed the worst about it. And her fear, because she never once questioned it, spread through a whole forest of creatures far larger and stronger than herself. The fruit was only ever a fruit. The danger was never real. It lived only in the telling, passed from one worried heart to the next. So much of our own fear works in just this way. We hear the sound, and we move. We feel the first small flutter of worry, and the mind hurries ahead and begins to build its forest, and before long we are living inside it, as though it were solid and true. We rarely do the one thing the lion did: to turn around, walk back to where the fear began, and look. This is the heart of the practice. The next time fear rises in you, you do not have to run from it, and you do not have to fight it. You can be a little like the lion. You can pause and ask one simple question: what is actually here? What did I truly see, or hear, or feel, just now, in this moment? Not what might come later. Not the whole forest of worry. Only what is here. You can see this in the small moments of an ordinary day. Someone dear is late coming home, and within minutes the mind has pictured something gone wrong. A message goes unanswered, and we are certain we have done something to offend. A friend speaks in a flat voice, and we decide they must be upset with us. In each case, the mind has heard a small sound and started to move, building its forest, troubling itself with a story it has not paused to check. And in each case, there is another way. We can stop and softly ask, what do I really know, right now, for certain? Most often, the answer is very little. Most often, it is just a fruit upon the ground. This is what the Buddha meant by seeing things as they are. Not adding to them, not painting them over with worry, but meeting them just as they truly are. There is a deep calm in this. When we stop believing every uneasy story the mind tells us, we come back to the present moment. And here, in this moment, we are so often quite all right. The Buddha once taught that fear is born from craving, from our grasping after things and our wish to keep them safe. He said that for the heart, which has learned to loosen its hold, there is no fear left at all. Most of us are still far from that, and that is perfectly fine. But each time we pause and look, instead of turning and running, we take one small and steady step in its direction. The young man in the forest knew this well. He kept his seat. He let the fear pass through him. And slowly, over many long nights, he grew free of it. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the weight of your body settled where you are. There is nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. When you are ready, we will continue on together. Fear is a curious thing. It can grow up around the things we dislike and naturally wish to avoid. But it can also grow up around the things we long for, around peace, around openness, even around freedom itself. We assume we are afraid of hard things, pain, loss, the views of others, and we are. But sit with the heart a little longer, and we find that fear can attach itself to almost anything. The new opportunity, the kind invitation, the very door that opens onto more space in our lives. The Buddha understood this well. He saw that the human heart clings to what is small and familiar, even when something larger and freer is being offered. He spoke of how we carry our familiar suffering around with us, like a tired traveler who cannot set down her heavy bundle, even though her shoulders have begun to ache, simply because she has carried it for so long that she no longer remembers how to walk without it. We hold our worries close even when they wear us down. We keep our small, tight habits of mind even when they limit us. And when something larger comes offering to lift these things from us, we often pause at the doorway, suddenly, not quite sure, we are ready to step through. It is one of the strange truths of being human that the freedom we say we want is also, sometimes, the freedom we quietly fear. From the Zen tradition comes an account of a master and his students, and an offer that no one quite knew how to accept. In a small monastery high in the mountains, there once lived an old master who was loved by his students. He was patient with them. He had taught them for many years. They had walked with him through long winters and long summers, learning to sit, learning to look, learning to slow down and meet the world as it is. One evening, as the sun was settling behind the hills and the air had begun to cool, the master called his students together in the main hall. They came in and took their places on the cushions, one by one, until they were all seated before him. They could see from his face that he had something on his mind. He waited until the room was still. Then he spoke. "Tonight," he said, "I make you an offer. Whoever among you wishes for complete freedom, complete liberation from all suffering, may step forward now, and it will be given." The hall was very still. The students looked at one another. A few of them shifted on their cushions. No one stepped forward. Inside each of them, something was happening. One student felt his heart begin to beat faster, the way it had on the first morning he had ever come to the monastery, all those years ago. Another remembered her small room at the end of the corridor, and the simple cup she drank from each morning, and the cool stones of the floor under her feet, and wondered, without quite forming the thought, whether she would still know herself if she stepped forward. A third looked at the master's lined, kind face, and felt how dearly he loved this old man, and how strange it was that even with all this love, he could not bring himself to move. The master waited. He did not seem disappointed, and he did not seem surprised. He simply waited, the way someone waits for a sunrise they know is coming in its own time. After some time, he spoke a second time. Whoever wishes for complete freedom, complete liberation, may step forward, and it will be given. Still no one moved. A young student in the back row looked down at his hands. An older student near the front blinked slowly and did not lift his eyes. The wind passed softly through the open windows. The lamps flickered. The master waited again. And then, for a third time, he said the same words, as if giving them every chance. Whoever wishes for complete freedom, complete liberation, may step forward now. The silence held. No one came forward. The master smiled, just a little. And then, very softly, he said, "The offer is withdrawn." The students sat in that stillness for a long while afterward. They had come to this teacher precisely because they were searching for freedom. They had given up much in their lives to be in this monastery, with this master. And yet, when freedom was offered to them, something in each of them had hesitated. That hesitation is something every one of us carries. So what is it we are afraid of when freedom itself is on the table? When we look honestly, we find that fear has many faces. Each one is familiar. Fear of the body is common. The body changes as the years move along, and we are not always ready for those changes. We notice an ache that was not there before, and the mind hurries ahead, asking what it might mean. We see a new line on the face in the mirror, and something inside tightens. The body, which has been with us all our life, can begin to seem like a stranger we are wary of. Many of us are also afraid of our own feelings. We may be afraid of sadness, in case it will not lift. We may be afraid of anger, in case it carries us somewhere we do not wish to go. Some of us are even afraid of joy, because joy comes hand in hand with the worry that it might leave again. The inner world can feel like a room we are not sure we want to enter alone. There is the matter of how others see us. It is one of the oldest fears, and almost no one is free of it. We worry about saying the wrong thing. We worry about looking foolish. We rehearse small encounters in our minds, and then rehearse them once more. We long to be received well, and we tighten at the thought of being received poorly. The Buddha called this the worldly winds. Praise and blame, fame and dishonor. He saw how easily a heart can be moved by them, and how much suffering this movement creates. Deeper still is the fear of what we might find if we look honestly inside ourselves. What if I discover that I am not as kind as I have hoped to be? What if I am, beneath all my careful efforts, not enough? This fear keeps many a person from sitting still for long, because in sitting still, we might meet ourselves more clearly than we usually do. We can be afraid of the forms our lives take. The form of a relationship, and also the thought of being outside that form. The shape of the work we do, and also the prospect of stepping away from it. The routines that hold us, and a life without them. For some, there is also a fear of stillness itself. The moment all the noise stops, all the busy doing, all the small distractions, something inside grows uneasy. We are not always sure what we will meet in the silence, and so we keep filling the silence with sound. The Buddha noticed this very clearly. He saw how many of his students struggled, at first, with simply sitting and doing nothing at all. He was patient with them. He understood that stillness can feel, in the beginning, like a small kind of letting go. And there is the fear that runs underneath many of the others. The fear of change, of things not staying as they are. We grow attached to our circumstances, our health, our loves, our season of life. And underneath, often unspoken, is the worry of losing what we hold dear. This is a very natural fear, and the Buddha spoke to it again and again. He did not promise his students that nothing would change. Change is the very nature of things. He offered something better. He showed them that a heart at peace with change is a heart no longer ruled by the fear of it. There seems to be no limit. We can be afraid of almost anything. And, as the Master's story shows us, we can even be afraid of freedom. Because freedom, real freedom, asks us to loosen our hold on the small-known self, with all its small-known troubles. And the heart is not always certain it wants to loosen its hold. Why does the heart hesitate? The Buddha taught that we cling to what we know. The familiar, even when painful, has a strange comfort to it. The unfamiliar, even when full of promise, can feel like a long fall into open air. So we say yes to freedom in our thoughts and no to it in our bones. We want to be free, and we also want to keep ourselves just as we are. There is no shame in this. It is one of the most human things about us. The students in the Master's Hall were not failures. They were honest. They had not yet found in themselves the courage to step forward into something so large, all at once. What the story holds, beneath its simple words, is an invitation. With great patience, and without a trace of disappointment, the Master was showing his students that the door had been open all along, and he was showing them something more. The door will keep being open, tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Each time we sit with our fear, each time we look at it instead of running, we move a small distance closer to it. In the Buddhist understanding, the path to freedom is not one great leap. It is a long, slow walking. Each step is small. Each step matters. And the fear that whispers, "Do not go," loses some of its hold simply because we keep walking. There is great relief in knowing this. We are not asked to find the courage for total freedom all at once. We only have to meet this next breath with a little more openness. To greet this next moment with a little more kindness. To soften, just a little, around whatever fear is here. That is already the beginning of freedom. That is already, the Buddha would say, the path itself. And there is one more comfort to take from the story. The Master smiled, just a little, before he withdrew his offer. He understood his students. He had been in their place once. He knew that the heart needs time. He was not in a hurry, and the truth he was pointing to is not in a hurry either. Freedom waits. It has waited patiently for every human being who has ever lived, and it is waiting just as patiently for each of us tonight. It is said that after that evening, the Master continued to teach his students for many more years. He never spoke again of the offer he had made in the hall. He simply went on, day after day, helping them learn to sit, learning to look, learning to slow down. He knew the door stays open. He knew his students would come to it, in their own time, when their hearts were ready. And one by one, over the seasons, they did. Pause here together for a moment. Notice your breath, moving on its own, without your help. There is nothing to figure out, and nothing to decide. When you are ready, we will continue. Fear does not always come dressed as fear. Sometimes it slips into our lives wearing the clothes of something else. It can look like desire. It can look like passion. It can even look like wisdom or love. And when fear hides this way, we can spend years following it without realizing we are following it at all. This is something the Buddha pointed to with great care. He taught his students to look closely at what was truly moving them beneath the surface, beneath the explanations the mind offers itself, all the way down to what was actually driving each choice, each grasp, each rush. He understood that we can be deceived by our own minds in ways that are subtle and very common. In Zen, this looking is sometimes called clear seeing. It is a kind, honest attention to our own life, free of any sharpness or blame. It simply asks us to see what is actually here. Picture a wealthy merchant of long ago who could not open his hand. He lived in a trading town long ago, where caravans came in from distant places, carrying silk and spices, and bowls of polished bronze. Over many years he had grown rich. His house was filled with beautiful things, and his storerooms were filled with cloth and grain. He thought of himself as a careful man, a practical man, a man who knew the value of what he had. But there was something his wife had begun to notice. When their neighbor fell on hard times and asked for a small loan, the merchant said no. He said it kindly, but firmly. When a traveler came to the gate hungry, he gave the smallest portion he could. When a temple in the town asked for help with its repairs, he found reasons why now was not the right time. There will always be more need than I can meet, he told his wife. I must be careful. His wife did not argue with him. But one evening, as they sat together in the cool of the courtyard, she asked him a simple question. My dear husband, she said, when you give nothing, what do you feel? He was silent for a long time. He had not expected the question. I feel safe, he said at last. And when you imagine giving something, even a small thing, what do you feel then? He sat with this for a longer time. He realized, slowly, that what he felt was not careful. It was not practical. It was a tightening in the chest, a small, anxious feeling, a voice in the back of his mind saying, it will not be enough. There will not be enough. He had thought he was being prudent. He was, in truth, being afraid. That night he sat in the courtyard alone, looking up at the stars, and he saw for the first time that his caution had been wearing a costume. The costume of wisdom. The costume of practicality. Underneath, all along, there had been fear. Fear of loss. Fear of not having enough. Fear, even, of being someone who gave too freely and was then thought a fool. The merchant did not change overnight. But from that evening on, he began to look more honestly at what moved him. And slowly, very slowly, his hand began to open. The first thing he gave was a small sack of grain to the family at the end of his lane. He carried it himself instead of sending a servant. As he walked home afterward, he noticed something. The tightness in his chest had not increased. If anything, it had eased. The fear, which had told him for so many years that giving would harm him, had been wrong. He felt lighter, not lighter in his purse, but lighter in his heart. And he understood, in that simple walk back along the lane, that his fear had not been protecting him at all. It had been keeping him small. This is how fear often hides. It dresses up as something more flattering. Fear can become prudence when underneath is only the wish not to lose. It can show as ambition when underneath is the worry of being left behind. It can hide in the love of comfort when underneath is the dread of having to bear any discomfort at all. And it has been known to wear the costume of hard work itself, busying us so completely that we never have to feel what would arise if we were ever to stop. We can find fear hiding in the way we love. Sometimes what looks like devotion is really the fear of being alone if the loved one were to leave. We can find it in the way we hold opinions, gripping them tightly because something in us is afraid of what it might mean to be wrong. We can find it in the kindness we give, when the kindness has more to do with wanting to be liked than with truly caring for another. None of this means we are unkind people. It only means that fear is more woven into our daily lives than we usually notice. The Buddha said that craving and aversion are the great movers of the unawakened mind. We grasp at what we want, and we push away what we do not want. Beneath both is often a frightened heart, trying to make itself safe in a world that will not stay still. When we begin to recognize these disguises in ourselves, something changes. Not all at once, but slowly, we stop being pulled around by fear that is calling itself by other names. We see the costume, and the costume loses some of its power. Now consider a celebrated court musician who came to learn what lay beneath her great passion. She had played for the royal court since she was a girl. Her hands knew the strings of the lute as well as her own face. When she played, the whole hall would still, and even the busiest of the courtiers would stop their whispering and listen. She loved her art, or so she believed. She practiced every day, from the first pale light of morning until well past dark. She played at every banquet, every celebration, every restful hour the queen requested. When she was not playing, she was thinking about playing. She felt restless when her hands were still. She felt small and uneasy when she was not on the stage. One season, she fell unwell. It was nothing serious, but her hands grew weak, and the court physician told her she must rest them for some weeks. She must let them recover. The first days were hard for her. She did not know what to do with herself. She paced the small garden behind her quarters. She woke in the night and reached for her lute, only to remember she could not lift it. She felt a strange hollow place opening inside her, where the music had been. She had never sat with that hollow before. The music had always covered it. The applause had always covered it. The constant practicing had always covered it. In her stillness, she began to see. The art she loved so much had also been a way of running. She had not stopped, because if she stopped, she would have to meet whatever she had been running from. And what she had been running from was a quiet fear that she was, beneath all the playing, no one at all. For many days she sat with this. It was painful, but the pain did not break her, as she had feared it would. It softened. It moved through her. And underneath the fear, she began to find something she had not known was there. A simple, steady peace. A small inner room that was her own, that did not need an audience to exist. She began to enjoy the small things she had been too busy to notice. The light coming through the lattice in the morning, the taste of warm tea, the sound of birds in the garden. None of these things required her to perform. None of these things asked anything of her at all. They were simply there, offered to her every day, and she had been moving so quickly that she had hardly noticed them. The Buddha had taught that peace is closer than we think, and is often hidden by our own hurry. She came to understand this in the slow afternoons of her recovery, sitting by the lattice and watching the light change on the floor. When her hands were strong again, and she returned to her lute, something had changed. She still loved the music, but now she played because she loved it, and no longer because she was afraid of the silence. Her playing became different. Those who heard her said her music had grown deeper, softer, more true. The frightened hurry was gone. She had not lost her passion. She had found a truer one underneath. Looking honestly at what is moving us is one of the kindest things we can do for ourselves. The Buddha called this kind of looking right understanding. It is simple, and it asks only that we pay honest attention to what is happening within us. We may begin to ask, gently, what is really driving this? When we grasp at this thing, what is underneath the grasping? When we fill every hour, what would happen if we did not? When we hold on so tightly, what is the fear that the holding is meant to hide? These questions are not meant to make us feel bad. They are meant to set us free. There is a teaching often heard in Zen that we already have everything we need. The light is already on inside us. We only need to stop covering it. And here is a kind question we might let sit in the heart, not as a pressure, but as an offering. Am I challenging fear enough in my life? Not in a harsh, demanding way. Not as another thing to do well. Simply as an honest, kind wondering. Where might fear be moving me without my noticing? Where might I be calling it by other names? What small place in my life could open a little if I were to recognize what was really there? The Buddha did not ask his students to push hard against themselves. He asked them only to see. He trusted that seeing clearly, in itself, would do most of the work. The harm is in not looking. To see clearly is to be free. And clear seeing always begins in kindness. Rest for a moment now. Feel the steady weight of your body where it is. Let your breath find its own pace. When you are ready, we will continue together. When fear arrives, the heart closes. It draws inward and grows small, as though trying to take up less space in the world. This happens without our deciding it, and often without our noticing. If we slow down enough to see, the closing is unmistakable. There is a tightening in the chest, a guardedness in how we hold ourselves, a reluctance to reach out. Even our breathing grows shallow, as though the body itself were trying to disappear. This is a very old reaction. It belongs to every creature that has ever been afraid. When danger seems near, the body curls inward to protect what is soft. The heart, which holds our capacity to love and to be moved by life, does the same. It tightens. It steps back. It closes its door. In Buddhism, this connection between fear and a closed heart is well understood. The Buddha saw it clearly. He watched how a frightened mind could not easily love. He watched how a loving heart could not easily fear. These two qualities seemed to live at opposite ends of a single line. Where one was strong, the other grew faint. Fear and love do not sit comfortably in the same heart. They push against each other. The more room one takes up, the less room there is for the other. We can see this in our own daily lives. When something has frightened us, even a small thing, we are less patient with those around us. We are quicker to judge. We are slower to feel warmth. The heart has closed a little, and the closing affects everything that follows. You can notice it in the smallest of moments. A car turns suddenly in front of us on the road, and a flash of fear arises, and we find ourselves muttering harsh words about a stranger we will never meet. The phone rings with unwelcome news, and for the rest of the morning, we are short with the people we love. A worry about money settles in the back of the mind, and dinner with a friend feels less warm than it would have a week before. These reactions are not who we are. They are the closed heart showing itself in passing throughout our days. The opposite is just as true. When something has touched us with love, when we have just been with someone dear, when a moment of beauty has passed through us, fear has a harder time taking hold. We are softer, steadier, less easily shaken. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's teachings, contains a line that has been passed down for over 2,000 years. Hatred does not cease by hatred. By love alone it ceases. This is an eternal law. The Buddha was speaking of more than hatred between people. He was pointing to something deeper. The harshness in our own heart, the tightness, the fear, these do not soften under more harshness. They yield only to the warmth of love. Imagine an old woman who lived in a small mountain village long ago. She was known to everyone, yet no one was close to her. She had lived a difficult life. Many years before, she had lost much that was dear to her, and her heart had closed against the world. She no longer trusted easily. She kept her door shut. She spoke little. The other villagers, sensing her hardness, kept their distance. One spring, a young monk arrived in the village. He had been sent to live in the modest temple at its edge, to study and to be of service. He was unassuming, and he asked nothing of anyone. On his first walk through the village, he passed the old woman's gate. She was sitting in her yard, looking down at her hands. He greeted her with a soft bow. She did not look up. The next day, he passed again. He bowed again. She did not look up. This went on for many days. He would walk by, bow, and continue on his way. She would not lift her eyes. The villagers, watching, shook their heads. They told him not to bother. She has been like that for years, they said. She will not soften. The young monk did not argue with them. He simply kept walking past her gate, kept bowing, kept being kind. He did not press her, and he asked nothing personal of her. He met her with the same warmth he would have offered to anyone. After some weeks, on a warm afternoon, the old woman looked up. She did not smile. She did not speak. But for the briefest moment, her eyes met his. He bowed, as he always did, and went on his way. A few days later, when he passed, she nodded. A slight nod, hardly a movement at all. But he saw it, and he returned it. After another month, when he passed, she said one word. Hello. He stopped and bowed and said, hello, back. Through that summer, she began to speak more. A few words at first, then a sentence, then a brief remark about the weather or the garden. The young monk never pressed her. He met her wherever she was, day after day. By autumn, when the leaves had begun to turn, she invited him into her yard for tea. She brought out 2 cups, and they sat together in silence. Few words passed between them, but something between them was no longer closed. The winter that followed was a long one. The young monk continued to pass her gate each day, bowing as he always had. She began to call to him on the cold mornings, inviting him in to warm his hands by her fire. They drank tea together more and more often. They spoke of ordinary things, the weather, the bread she was baking, the children she could hear playing further down the lane. When spring came round again, something in her had loosened further. She began to step out from her gate of her own accord. She greeted her neighbors when they passed. She brought a bowl of soup to a sick child down the street and a basket of warm bread to an elderly couple at the edge of the village. Her smile, when she gave these things, was still a little uncertain, as though she were learning to use a part of herself she had set aside for many years. In the years that followed, the old woman became one of the kindest people in the village. She helped a young mother whose husband was unwell. She baked bread for the temple. She invited lonely travelers in for a meal. The villagers watched all this and could hardly believe their eyes. She told them, when they asked, "He did not try to change me. He only kept being kind. And one day my heart, which had been closed for so long, simply opened. I think it had only been waiting." This is something the Buddha understood. The closed heart is not as stubborn as it appears. It is waiting for safety, for warmth, for some sign that it can open again without being hurt. An old account tells how the Buddha came to teach loving kindness to his students. A group of monks had gone into a forest to practice in silence. The forest, though, was already home to many beings who did not welcome them. The monks felt watched. They felt uneasy. Their meditation was disturbed by an ongoing sense of fear. They could not settle. After some time, they returned to the Buddha. They told him they could not practice in that forest. They had tried, but the fear in them was too strong. The Buddha did not send them to another forest. He did not tell them to be braver. He taught them, instead, a short discourse on loving kindness. He asked them to fill their hearts with warmth as they walked, to wish well-being for every being they passed, to extend a steady goodwill in every direction. The monks returned to the forest. This time they walked with kindness in their hearts, in place of fear. And it is said that the very forest seemed to welcome them. The beings who had once disturbed them grew still. The monks settled into their practice, and they were no longer afraid. What the Buddha taught them that day has come down to us as the Metta Sutta, the discourse on loving kindness. It has been kept and recited for more than 2,000 years. And the lesson woven through it is the one those monks discovered in the forest. A heart full of warmth has little room left in it for fear. The Buddha taught a kind of love that he called metta. The word is sometimes translated as loving kindness. It is a warmth without strings attached, a goodwill that asks nothing in return, a wish for the well-being of all beings, including ourselves. What is striking about metta is how naturally it dissolves fear. The Buddha taught that a heart filled with loving kindness is a heart in which fear cannot easily live. This is simply how the heart works. Warmth and fear cannot occupy the same space. This is why, in many old Buddhist communities, before a difficult task or a long journey, the people would sit together and turn their hearts toward kindness. They had noticed something. When the heart was full of warmth, the body was steadier. The mind was clearer. Fear had less room to enter. We see something similar in the story of the old woman. She had not been transformed by any clever teaching. No one had argued her into a softer life. She had simply been met, day after day, with patient kindness until her heart, which had been closed for so long, found it safe to open again. A heart that has been wounded by fear can take time to reopen. The Buddha understood this. He invited his students to begin with themselves, to offer their own tired, frightened hearts the same warmth they would offer to a small child who was afraid in the night. The first heart that needs softening is always our own. And as we soften toward ourselves, something curious happens. The world softens toward us, too. People become a little less threatening. The day's small troubles take up a little less room. Fear, which had been the loudest voice in the room, becomes one voice among many, and not always the one we listen to first. When fear comes, we can do something kinder than fighting it or pushing it away. We can bring warmth to the place where the fear is. A hand placed softly over the heart. A breath taken slowly. A wish, however small, that we might be at ease. The closing of the heart and the opening of the heart are not two separate events. They are one event, moving in different directions. What closes can also open. What has tightened can also soften. The heart that has drawn inward in fear is the very same heart that can, in the next moment, draw outward in love. This is the great mercy at the center of the Buddhist path. Everything in us is in motion. Fears pass. What has closed can open again in its own time. The heart is always able to open again, given time, warmth, and the kind of patient presence that the young monk offered the old woman by the gate. Here is what the Buddha understood about all this. We do not have to wait to be free of fear before we begin to be kind to ourselves. The kindness comes first. The freedom follows. A heart that has been met with warmth, again and again, slowly remembers that warmth is its own true nature. Fear becomes a visitor and not a resident. And we begin to live the way the Buddha lived in his later years. Steadily, openly, with a heart that has truly opened and stays open through whatever the day may bring. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel the small space around your heart. Let your breath move there, easily. When you are ready, we will continue on together. Fear has a curious quality. From outside, it can look like one large thing, a single solid wave that rolls over us. From inside, when we slow down enough to look, it is many smaller things gathered together. The Buddha discovered this through long hours of careful attention. He sat, he looked, and he let his experience reveal itself to him without rushing. And what he found, when he turned his attention onto fear, was that fear was not the seamless wall it appeared to be. It was made of pieces. Each piece could be seen on its own. Once seen on its own, each piece became smaller, more workable, less overwhelming than it had been when it stood as one giant, unknown thing. The things we are afraid of often grow smaller in the light of careful attention. So let us look. What is fear actually made of? When fear arises, the first thing we notice is something happening in the body. There is a tightness in the chest, a flutter in the stomach, a quickness to the breath. The hands may grow cool. The shoulders may rise toward the ears. Sometimes the face flushes or grows pale. Different people feel it in different places, but it is always somewhere in the body. These sensations are not the same as the danger. They are the body's response. It's preparing to act. The Buddha taught his students to notice these sensations directly, without rushing past them. Most of us, when we feel fear in the body, immediately try to escape it. We jump up, or distract ourselves, or reach for the phone, or for food, or for any small thing that can pull our attention away from the discomfort. The Buddha invited his students to do the opposite, to sit with the sensation, to see what it actually felt like, and to notice that, in itself, it was only a sensation. Tight perhaps, and uncomfortable, but no more than that. Most of us live with these body sensations many times a day, often without naming them as fear. A flicker before a meeting. A tightness when the phone rings unexpectedly. A faint wave when we open a letter we have been waiting for. The body knows fear long before the mind catches up. Recognizing this is itself a kindness. We begin to meet fear earlier, when it is still small, and with more understanding than we usually bring. The second thing we notice, when we slow down, is what is happening with thought. The mind, when fear arrives, is usually running. It is racing ahead, into the future. What if this happens? What if that happens? What will I do then? The thoughts are loud, quick, often repetitive. They build on each other. They paint pictures of things that have not happened and might never happen. When the Buddha looked at this, he saw something interesting. The fear was being held up, in large part, by the thoughts. Without the thoughts spinning, the body sensations alone would not be very frightening. They would simply be sensations. The fear was being amplified, again and again, by a mind painting pictures of trouble to come. So much of what frightens us is not happening now. It is happening in the mind, in a possible future, in a what-if that has never come to pass. The Buddha pointed his students again and again toward the present moment, because the present moment, for the most part, is where fear cannot easily live. Right now, in this breath, very little is usually wrong. The danger is almost always in a moment that has not yet arrived, and that very often will never arrive at all. The third thing we notice is harder to describe. There is a kind of shrinking that happens in the inner space of the mind. Where a moment before there was room, there is now no room. The mind, which usually feels wide enough to hold many thoughts and feelings, narrows down to a point. The point is the thing we are afraid of. Everything else has fallen away. The world has become small. This narrowing is one of the most uncomfortable parts of fear. It feels as though fear has taken over everything. There is no room left. We are nothing but the fear, and the fear is everywhere. But the Buddha pointed to something that, once noticed, changes much. The narrowing is itself part of the fear, and not the truth of things. It is one more sensation, like the tightness in the chest. It can be seen, and it can ease. Here is something the Buddha's students discovered through long observation. When fear is strong, there is always somewhere in the body that does not feel afraid. The earlobes, for example, almost never feel afraid. The tips of the toes are usually at ease too. The little finger of the left hand rarely carries any fear in it at all. This sounds like a minor thing. It is a much larger thing than it sounds. When the mind has shrunk down to the size of the fear, it can be deeply freeing to find one small place in the body that is at rest. Even just for a moment. The narrowing was not absolute after all. The world has not actually become small. There is still earth under our feet. There is still a small finger that is not afraid. There is still the soft skin of an earlobe, holding no fear at all. And this discovery, however small, is the first crack in the wall. The fear, which had seemed to be everywhere, is not actually everywhere. It is somewhere, and the somewhere can be looked at, met, and slowly understood. To find these small places of peace in the middle of fear is to discover something the Buddha taught directly. The whole of us is not the fear. We are larger than what we feel in any single moment. The fear is a guest in a much bigger house. And the guest, however loud he may be, does not own the house. Knowing this can change how we sit with a difficult feeling. When fear arrives, instead of letting it fill the whole room, we can remember that the room is much larger than the fear. There is the body, with all its many parts that are not afraid. There is the steady breath, moving in and out, without our needing to manage it. There is the small life of the room around us, the air, the sounds, the soft give of whatever we are resting on. All of this is here too. The fear has come to visit, but it has not erased everything else. And when we remember that, the fear naturally takes its honest size, which is much smaller than it had pretended to be. Let us listen to a story from the Zen tradition. A young monk once came to his teacher in great distress. He said, "Master, I am full of fear. It is everywhere in me. It fills my whole being. I do not know what to do." The old master listened patiently. Then he said, "Show me this fear." The young monk paused. "What do you mean?" "Show me where the fear is," said the master. "Point to it." The young monk frowned. He put his hand to his chest. "It is here," he said. "All of it?" asked the master. The young monk thought about this. "No," he said slowly. "Not all of it. Some of it is in my stomach." "And what about your hands?" asked the master. The young monk looked at his hands. "My hands are not afraid," he said. "And your feet?" The young monk wiggled his toes inside his sandals. "My feet are not afraid either." "And your eyes? Are your eyes afraid?" The young monk noticed his eyes. They felt fine. "No," he said, surprised. "And your ears?" The young monk listened. He heard the wind in the trees, and the small sounds of the monastery, and the song of a bird far off. "No," he said again, more surprised still. The old master smiled. "So this fear that fills your whole being," he said, "where is it?" The young monk sat for a long while in silence. He had come into the room certain that fear was everything. Now he could not quite find it. The master spoke once more. "When we look at fear from outside, it seems to be everything. When we look at it from inside, with patient attention, we find that it is somewhere, and it is something, and that it is far smaller than it seemed. The whole of who we are is always much larger than any fear." The young monk bowed deeply and left the room. He had been given the beginning of his freedom. What the master had done was simple. He had not lectured or argued. He had only asked the monk to look. And in looking, the young monk had discovered for himself what no teaching alone could have shown him. Fear could be named. It could be located. it could be seen for what it was. Once seen, it could no longer pretend to be the whole. There is something the Zen tradition has long pointed to. We are not our passing experiences. The clouds that move across the sky are not the sky. The waves that rise and fall on the ocean are not the ocean. Fear, sorrow, even joy, all of these move through us. They visit, they leave. What remains beneath them is something much larger and steadier than they are. The young monk had been shown, simply and clearly, the difference between himself and the fear that was passing through him. This is what looking carefully at fear can reveal. It is made of parts, sensations in the body, thoughts about the future, a narrowing of inner space. Each can be seen, and meeting them one by one is much easier than facing them as a single overwhelming wall. The Buddha did not teach this so that his students would have a clever way of analyzing themselves. He taught it because he saw that fear had less power over them once they understood what it was made of. The mystery had been part of the suffering. When the mystery was gone, the fear grew smaller. There is real comfort in this. The next time fear arises, we are not required to accept its claim of being everything. We can pause and look and find one corner of the body that is at peace. One small place, the earlobe, the tip of a finger, the breath moving in the belly. These small places remind us of something the Buddha pointed to again and again. The whole of who we are is always larger than any single experience passing through us. Most of us have spent much of our lives carrying fear as if it were one solid, overwhelming wall. To see, even once, that it is made of parts, and that each part can be met on its own, is to walk out from under a long shadow. The fear may come again. It almost certainly will. But it will never feel quite so large or quite so absolute once we have seen what it is truly made of. Fear comes, and it is real. But it is always smaller than it pretends to be. Once we have seen this, even once, we have begun to step out from under its shadow. Take a slow breath here. Feel the soft weight of your body, settled where it is. There is nothing you need to do. When you are ready, we will continue together. What we cannot bear today, we may be able to hold tomorrow. The Buddha taught his students this gently, again and again. The heart can be widened. The mind can grow steadier. What once swept us off our feet can come to feel, in time, like a wave passing through a deep and patient ocean. Many people believe that bravery is the absence of fear. The Buddha taught something different. He taught that bravery is the presence of fear, met without being swept away. The fear may still come. The trembling may still rise. But around it, slowly, there can grow a larger space. A vessel that can hold what once felt unholdable. This widening does not happen all at once. It happens slowly, almost without our noticing. The same fear that once filled our whole world, given time, comes to feel like something passing through. We are still the one experiencing it. We are no longer drowning in it. The Buddha discovered this through long years of patient looking. He would sit in the forest, in his hut, on the bank of a river, and notice how each fear that arose in him moved and changed. He saw that the more he met his fear without struggle, the more capacity he developed for being with it. Each time he stayed instead of running, his capacity grew a little. Each time he turned toward the fear with kindness, the fear lost some of its power. This is a teaching that has been passed down through the Buddhist tradition for over 2,000 years. Capacity grows through patient meeting. We are simply invited to be with fear, again and again, until the meeting itself becomes natural. We are not pretending the fear isn't there, nor finding pleasure in it. We are letting it be what it is, and letting our hearts become large enough to hold it. There is something important about how we learn this. The Buddha was clear. We do not need to be in the middle of a storm to begin growing this capacity. We can begin in calm moments. We can sit in a safe place and let small worries arise and meet them with steadiness. When larger fears come later, we have already trained the heart. We have already learned the shape of meeting rather than fleeing. For centuries, this is one of the reasons people have sat in meditation. They were preparing themselves for life. They were growing a heart and a body that could be with whatever arose. In the old Buddhist scriptures, there is a tale of an aged sea captain who guided his ship through waters that no other captain dared to enter. He was a master mariner of his time. His eyes had grown weak with the years, and he could no longer see distant things clearly. But his knowledge of the sea was so deep, and his calm so steady, that ship owners still came to him when they had cargoes to carry through difficult waters. One season, a merchant asked him to guide a great ship across a long and unfamiliar sea to a port that none of them had visited before. When the merchant came to him with the offer, the old captain asked only one question. He did not ask about the weather, or the cargo, or the wages. He asked, "Do your sailors know fear?" The merchant was puzzled. "They are young, sir, and eager," he said. The old captain nodded slowly. "Then I will come with them. They will need someone who has met it before." The captain agreed to the voyage. A young crew was hired, eager and strong, though none of them had ever sailed these waters. For the first many days, the journey went well. The wind was kind. The sun was warm. The young crew sang as they worked. Then they entered a stretch of sea where strange things began to appear. One morning, the water around them turned a bright color, a deep crimson that none of them had ever seen. The crew were uneasy. Some thought the sea was wounded. Some thought a great creature had stained the water. They ran to the old captain, calling out, their faces pale. The captain sat at his small place at the back of the ship. He listened to them. Then he said, very calmly, "This is the Sea of Coral. There is a great reef beneath us, alive with red coral. It is harmless. We will pass through in a day. Steer us a little to the east, where the water is deeper." The crew, calmed by his certainty, did as he asked. By the next morning, the water had returned to its ordinary color, and they sailed on. A few days later, the sea around them grew oddly bright, almost glowing in the night. The crew were uneasy again. Some thought the sea had been bewitched. Some thought spirits were rising from below. They ran once more to the captain. He listened. Then he said, "This is the Sea of Lights. The water here carries tiny creatures that glow in the dark. They are harmless. Stand at the rails for a moment and watch. It is one of the most beautiful sights in all the seas. We will pass through in 2 nights." The crew, again calmed, did as he said. They stood at the rails and watched the glowing water, and some of them began to laugh with wonder rather than fear. A few days after that, the ship entered a stretch of sea where the water was the color of milk. The crew, by now, had begun to learn. They did not panic. They went to the captain and asked, quietly, "What is this one, sir?" He smiled. "This is the sea of milk. There is a kind of plant beneath the water here that gives it this color. It, too, is harmless. We will pass through by sunset tomorrow." A week later, the ship passed through waters that seemed to swallow the sun. The sea here was a deep, dark blue, almost black, and very still. The young crew fell silent. They felt small upon such waters. One of the sailors went to the captain and asked, his voice low, "Sir, what is this?" The old captain answered, "This is the sea of great depth. It is where the floor of the ocean drops away very far down. The darkness you see is only the great depth itself. It is harmless. The water here is some of the purest in all the world. We will pass through in 3 days." The young sailor nodded slowly. He went back to his work. He looked at the dark water around them, and he saw it differently now. He saw something deep and old and still, something to be passed through with respect, as one might pass through a great library or a place of worship. By the end of the journey, the crew had passed through many strange waters. Each time, the captain had named what they saw. He had acknowledged that the sights were strange, while showing them that he knew what each one was. His calm had taught them to look without panic at things that would once have frightened them deeply. When they reached the far port, the captain spoke to them. "You have learned something on this voyage that will stay with you for the rest of your lives. You have learned that what you do not know can seem terrible, and is often not terrible at all. And you have learned that a calm presence beside you can make almost anything bearable. Carry both of these gifts home to your families." The young sailors bowed deeply. And it is said that, in the years that followed, when difficult times came in their own lives, they would remember the old captain at the back of the ship, naming each strange sea, steady and unafraid. What had grown in those young sailors, by the end of the voyage, was capacity. Their hearts had widened. They could now meet things that, weeks before, would have sent them into panic. This is what the Buddha taught about the inner life. Capacity is not a fixed amount we are born with. It is something that grows, slowly, through patient meeting. Each time we stay with a small fear, instead of running, our capacity to be with larger fears grows a little. Each time we sit through discomfort without fleeing, our ability to be with all kinds of discomfort grows. The vessel widens. In the Buddhist understanding of the mind, we are not stuck with the capacity we had yesterday. The heart, met with care, becomes larger. A fear that overwhelmed us a year ago can, given time, become a wave that passes through a much deeper ocean. This is something we can see in our own lives if we look. The first time we faced a difficult conversation, we were uncertain and shaky. The 5th time, we still felt the nerves, but they were smaller. The 10th time, we noticed they had become almost familiar. We were no longer swept away. We had grown a vessel for that particular sort of fear, simply by meeting it again and again. The same is true of so many things. The fear of speaking in front of others, which loosens with each time we step forward. The fear of the unknown, which softens with each new place we visit. The fear of being seen as we truly are, which eases each time we let ourselves be a little more honest. In every case, capacity grows through patient meeting, not through avoidance. The Buddha understood this deeply. He spoke of practice as a slow, steady growth, a gradual widening of the vessel, a deepening of the ocean, the heart learning over a lifetime to hold what passes through it. And there is something else those young sailors learned, which the Buddha pointed to again and again. The presence of someone calm is one of the greatest gifts a frightened person can receive. When we sit with our own fear with steadiness, we are quietly becoming the calm captain for everyone who comes near us. The old monks knew this. They knew that even one steady person in a room could change the whole feeling of that room. Confidence, in this Buddhist sense, is not the certainty that nothing difficult will happen. It is the certainty that, whatever happens, we can meet it. Whatever waters we enter, we will not be swept away. The fear may come. We will know what it is, and we will know how to be with it. We have done this before. We can do it again. This kind of confidence grows in small ways, over long years. It grows through patient meeting. It grows through every small moment we choose to stay, rather than run. And once it has begun to grow in us, it grows on its own. It does not need our forcing. It only needs our willingness to keep meeting what arises. There is something almost ordinary about this growth. It does not require dramatic moments or great challenges. It happens in the small daily choosing. The morning we sit with a worry rather than reaching for the phone. The afternoon we let a small disappointment be felt rather than pushed away. The evening we notice a flicker of anxiety and simply observe it, without judgment, without panic. Each of these is a small deposit in the deepening of the ocean. None of them feel important in the moment. Together, over months and years, they change who we are. The Buddha did not promise his students a life without storms. He promised them something better, a vessel large enough to ride the storms and a heart steady enough to find peace in the middle of them. Stay here for a moment. Notice the weight of your body where it sits or lies. Let your breath find its own pace. When you are ready, we will continue. Inside almost every experience of fear, there is a second movement that is harder to see. Beneath the fear of the thing itself, there is the fear of the fear. We are not only afraid of what we are afraid of, we are also afraid of feeling afraid. And this second layer, this fear of fear, is often what keeps the whole experience alive. The Buddha noticed this with great care. He saw that when his students struggled with fear, much of their suffering was not coming from the original threat. It was coming from their reaction to the fear itself. They tried to push it away. They judged themselves for having it. They added a layer of fighting on top of what was already difficult. And the layer of fighting was harder to bear than the original fear. This is what the Buddha called the second arrow. The first arrow is the thing itself, the painful experience that arises. The second arrow is the one we shoot ourselves in our reaction to the first. The first arrow is unavoidable, since life will bring difficulty to all of us. The second arrow is something we can learn, in time, to let go of. Let us look at this more carefully. When fear arises, the natural response is to push it away, to try to make it stop, to get up, to distract, to do anything other than feel what is being felt. This response is so old, so deep in us, that it happens before we even know it is happening. And yet, when we push fear away, we add energy to it. We tell it, without quite meaning to, that it is dangerous, that it must be fought, that it cannot be allowed to be here. The fear, which a moment before was a passing sensation, becomes something larger. The pushing has fed it. The Buddha taught a different way. He invited his students to let fear be present without fighting it. They were to allow it simply, without pushing or fleeing. He had noticed something remarkable through his own long practice. When fear was not resisted, it could not sustain itself. Without the second arrow, the first arrow lost much of its power. Fear feeds on our resistance. When we stop resisting, fear has nothing to grow upon. It comes, it is felt, and then it passes, like clouds across a clear sky. Picture a young monk who lived in a small monastery long ago. He was a good student. He worked hard. He loved the teachings. But every night when the lights went out, fear visited him in his small cell. The dark seemed to grow heavy around him. He would lie on his thin mat, hardly breathing, listening to every small sound, certain that something difficult was about to happen. He tried everything he could think of to make the fear go away. He tried to think of brave things. He tried to chant the verses he had been taught. He counted his breaths very slowly. Sometimes he hid under his blanket. Nothing worked. Each night, the fear came back, and the more he fought it, the larger it seemed to grow. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, he went to his old teacher and asked for help. The teacher listened with great patience. When the young monk had finished, the teacher asked, "What do you do when the fear comes?" "I try to make it leave," said the young monk. "And does it leave?" The young monk looked down. "No, it only grows." The old teacher nodded slowly. He sat for a long moment, looking at his student with great kindness. Then he said, "Tonight, when the fear comes, try something different. Do not push it away or fight it. Simply let it sit beside you. Treat it as if it were a small, frightened creature that had come into your cell and needed your company." The young monk did not understand. "But Master, the fear is uncomfortable. How can I welcome it?" "You do not have to welcome it. You only have to stop pushing. There is a great difference between hating something and being still with it. Try it tonight and see what happens." That evening, when the lights went out and the dark settled around him, the young monk did as his teacher had said. The fear arose, as it always did. He felt it in his chest, in his stomach, in the quickness of his breath. But this time, instead of pushing, he simply let it be there. It was hard at first. Every instinct in him wanted to fight. He kept reminding himself, "I am only letting it sit beside me. I do not have to do anything else." He breathed slowly. He let the fear be a small, frightened creature in the corner of the room. And something interesting began to happen. The fear, which had no resistance to push against, began to soften. It did not vanish all at once. It grew smaller, then smaller still. After some time, it was no more than a small, uncomfortable feeling, the remnant of what had been a great wave. The young monk lay there, in the dark, no longer afraid of being afraid. He fell asleep that night, more peacefully than he had in many months. The next morning he went to his teacher and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "it worked." The fear came, but it could not stay. I did not have to do anything. I only had to stop fighting. The old teacher smiled. Now you have learned one of the great secrets. Fear is held up by our struggle against it. When the struggle ends, fear cannot stand. Remember this for the rest of your life, my friend. The thing you do not have to fight will not be your enemy for long. In the weeks that followed, the young monk's nights became easier. The fear still came on some evenings, but it no longer overwhelmed him. When he felt the first stirrings of it, he would simply notice them, and he would let his hand of fighting fall open. He would let the fear be there, in the corner of the room, and he would let himself be there too, on his mat, and the two of them would sit together until sleep came. After many months, he noticed something else. The fear had begun to visit less often. It was as if it had grown bored, finding no one to push against. And on the rare nights when it did come, he would almost smile in the darkness, recognizing an old friend who had become much smaller than it used to be. The fear itself, without our resistance, is much smaller than it appears. It is the fighting that gives it strength, the pushing that feeds it, the fear of fear that holds it in place. You may have noticed this in your own life. When a difficult feeling comes, and we panic about the feeling, the panic grows. When the same feeling comes, and we let it be there, it often passes within minutes. This shows up in countless places in our life. We feel a flash of anger, and we judge ourselves for being angry, and the anger grows into hours of stewing. We feel a flash of sadness, and we worry that the sadness will not lift, and our worry grows into a day of low mood. We feel a small flicker of unease, and we tense around it, and a small thing becomes a sleepless night. In every case, the feeling itself was passing. It was the reaction to it that made it stay. This is because of the simple nature of fear itself. Fear cannot live in a heart that does not push against it. It can only live where it is being fought. The Buddha called this the way of non-resistance. It is far stronger than weakness or surrender. It is the deep understanding that what we fight only grows, and what we allow can finally pass. In everyday experience, this looks gentle and ordinary. A wave of unease passes through the chest as we wait for news. Instead of bracing against it, we let it be there. We feel its texture, the slight tightening, the held breath. We do not name it good or bad. We do not try to push it away. We watch it the way one might watch the wind move through tall grass. And in a moment, or in a few moments, the wind passes on. The grass settles. The chest softens. What had felt like a great wall of feeling becomes, on closer attention, a passing weather of the body, present for a while, and then quietly gone. Fear behaves in this same way when we stop fighting it. It still comes. It still moves through, but it no longer takes up the whole sky. When we stop being afraid of being afraid, we have taken a great step toward freedom. We have removed the second arrow. We may still be hit by the first arrow now and then. Life is like that. But the second arrow, which used to do most of the damage, is no longer something we shoot at ourselves. Notice what this means in plain terms. So much of our suffering, when we look honestly, is not the original difficulty. It is our response to the original difficulty. The original difficulty might last only a moment. Our reaction to it can last for hours, or days, or sometimes a whole lifetime. When we begin to see this clearly, we have found one of the greatest sources of relief the human heart can know. The Buddha did not promise his students a life without difficulty. He showed them, instead, how much of our suffering we have been adding ourselves. And he showed them, in the same breath, how we might add less of it, day by day, until the layers of self-made trouble grow gradually thinner. There is one more thing the Buddha understood about all this, and it is a great relief to hear. We do not have to be perfect at this, or to never resist again. The mind has been pushing against fear for a very long time. The pushing is a habit, and habits soften slowly. What matters is the noticing. Each time we notice we are resisting, and we let our grip loosen, even a little, we have weakened the second arrow. Over time, the noticing becomes faster. The softening becomes easier. The fear of fear, which used to seem like an unmovable mountain, begins to feel like something passing through. And we find, to our own surprise, that we are no longer the frightened person we once were. We have become something larger and steadier, something that has been quietly growing inside us all along, simply because we stopped pushing so hard. This is what the Buddhist tradition has known for centuries. The deepest changes in us do not come from effort or force. They come from a steady, persistent letting go. We do not have to push ourselves toward freedom. We only have to stop pushing against what is already arising. The freedom is there, waiting for us, beneath all our struggles. The fear we have lived with for so long, which has felt like an enemy to be defeated, is in truth more like a small, frightened part of ourselves that has been waiting for kindness. When we stop fighting it, we are not surrendering to it. We are simply allowing it to be what it is, and ourselves to be larger than it. And in that allowing, the long battle finally comes to an end. There is a deep stillness on the other side of this battle. It is the silence of no longer needing to fight. Whatever fear arises, we let it be present. Whatever passes through, we let it pass. And in time, what had once felt like a constant inner war becomes something much closer to peace. The peace does not depend on no fear ever arising. It holds within it whatever does arise. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to. A freedom that lives in the midst of fear, not only in its absence. Rest for a small moment now. Let the body soften. Let the breath move on its own. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a surprising gesture at the heart of the Buddhist path. It is the gesture of welcome. To welcome what we like is easy. To welcome what we have always wished to push away, the fear, the trembling, the small, frightened part of us that we have spent years trying to silence, is something else entirely. This goes a step beyond simply not fighting. This is not easy at first. The mind protests. It says, "Why would I welcome the very thing that makes me uncomfortable? Surely the goal is to be free of it." But the Buddha's teaching turns this on its head. He saw that the deepest freedom comes not from getting rid of fear, but from being on good terms with it. The fear that is welcomed becomes a guest. The fear that is fought becomes an enemy. And it is much easier to live with a guest than with an enemy. The Buddha taught a quality called metta, which we have touched on before. It is loving kindness, a steady warmth toward all beings. What is sometimes forgotten is that we ourselves are included in those beings. The first being we are invited to wish well-being for is the one closest to us, the one inside our own skin, the one who is feeling whatever is being felt in this very moment. This is something the Buddha was very clear about. He told his students that if they could not bring kindness to themselves, they would have a very hard time bringing real kindness to anyone else. Self-kindness, in his teaching, is not selfish. It is the foundation. From a kind heart toward oneself, kindness toward others flows naturally. From a harsh heart toward oneself, even our kindness to others has a hidden edge. From the Buddha's own life comes an account that points to this. A young monk had been practicing for a long time without making much progress. He was a serious student. He worked very hard. He pushed himself without mercy, and yet his mind would not settle. The Buddha came to him one day and asked, "Before you became a monk, you were a musician. You played the lute, did you not?" "Yes, Lord," said the young monk. "And tell me, when the strings of your lute were too tight, could you play it well?" "No, Lord." The sound was harsh. "And when the strings were too loose?" "No, Lord." The sound was dull. "And when they were tuned just right?" Then the lute sang. The Buddha smiled. "It is the same with the heart, my friend. Held too tightly, with too much harshness, it cannot find its peace. Held too loosely, with too little care, it cannot find its strength. Tuned with kindness, neither too tight nor too loose, it begins to sing." The young monk understood. He stopped fighting his own heart so hard, and in the kinder tuning, he found the peace that had eluded him. When fear arises in us, this is the moment when self-kindness matters most. The frightened part of us is not separate from us. It is us. The trembling in the chest is happening inside us. The worried thought is arising in our own mind. To push these away is to push away a part of ourselves. To welcome them is to bring ourselves back together. The Buddhist tradition has a beautiful name for this kind of self-acceptance. It is sometimes called holding oneself with the heart of a mother. A mother does good. This is how the Buddha invites us to hold our own fear. Let us turn to a story about a woman who lived in a village in the foothills of a great mountain range. She had carried a fear with her since she was a small child. It was the fear of being alone. She did not know exactly when it had begun, but as far back as she could remember, it had been there. A small cold feeling that would rise up in her when she was alone for too long. A sense, deep in her chest, that something terrible might come if there was no one near. She had tried for many years to outgrow this fear. She had busied herself with work. She had married kindly and had children. She had filled her days with neighbors and visitors and everyday kindnesses. But still, in the still moments, when the house was empty for a while, or the children were asleep, the old fear would rise in her. She would push it away as best she could and find something to do. One spring, she heard of a wise old hermit who lived in a modest dwelling at the foot of the mountains. People said he had a kind way with troubled hearts. She walked the long path to his door and asked if she might speak with him. He received her warmly and gave her tea. When she had settled, he asked, "What brings you here?" She told him about the fear that had been with her all her life. She described how hard she had tried to be free of it, how she had filled her days, how she had tried to think herself out of it, how nothing had worked. She had come, she said, hoping he might know some way to make the fear finally leave her. The old hermit listened with great patience. When she was finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he asked her a question she had not expected. How old was the part of you that first felt this fear? She thought. I was very small, she said. Perhaps 3 or 4. And what do you do with her now? This small girl inside you who is still afraid. The woman paused. I try to make her be quiet, she said slowly. I keep her from coming up. I pretend she is not there. The old hermit nodded. He took a slow breath. Then he said, You have been doing the wrong thing with her, my friend. You have been shutting her in a small room and turning away. And she has been waiting in there all these years with no one to hear her. The woman felt something move in her chest. Tears came to her eyes. What should I do? She asked. Go home, said the hermit. Find a still hour. Sit. And when the old fear rises in you, do not push it away. Imagine the small girl inside you, the one who first felt this. Open the door to that small room. Take her in your arms. Tell her that you are here now, that she is not alone, that you will sit with her for as long as she needs. Do this each day. Some days she will need much. Some days only a little. But always you will be there for her, the mother she has been missing all this time. The woman bowed deeply and walked home. That evening, when her children were asleep and the house had grown still, she sat down on her cushion. The old fear arose, as it always did. The familiar cold feeling. The sense of being alone in the world. This time, instead of pushing it away, she did as the hermit had told her. She closed her eyes. She imagined the small girl inside her. She saw her in her mind, sitting alone in a dim room, her arms around her knees, her face wet with old tears. The woman, in her mind, opened the door. She knelt down. She gathered the small girl into her arms. She did not say very much. She only held her and let her be afraid, and stayed with her, and stayed with her, and stayed with her. After some time, the cold feeling in the woman's chest began to soften. Not because the fear had gone, but because the fear was no longer alone. Someone was with it. And the someone, this time, was her. She sat for a long while, holding the small girl. When she finally opened her eyes, she felt different. Lighter, more whole than she had felt in many years. She slept more deeply that night than she had in months. In the morning when she woke, she noticed that the heaviness which had often greeted her on waking was not quite as thick as usual. It was still there, a little. But it was no longer the first thing she felt. The first thing she felt, on this morning, was the memory of holding the small girl in her arms. And the warmth of it stayed with her as she rose and began her day. She did this every evening for many months. Sometimes the small girl needed long holding, sometimes only a brief embrace. Slowly, very slowly, the old fear loosened its hold. It had been welcomed home rather than driven out, and that had made all the difference. In the Buddhist understanding of the inner life, the parts of ourselves that we have pushed away do not simply disappear. They wait. They wait for the moment when we are finally willing to turn toward them with kindness. And when we do, something very old in us begins to come back together. The Buddha taught that the self we wish well-being for, in our practice of metta, is always the whole self. This includes the polished and composed parts we like to show the world. It also includes the frightened part, the part that has been afraid for many years, and the parts we have tried very hard to leave behind. When we offer kindness to all of ourselves, especially the parts we have been at war with, the inner war begins to end. we become whole in a way we have not been for a long time. And from this wholeness, fear loses much of its hold. It has not been defeated. It has been brought home. There is a saying that comes down through the Buddhist tradition. It is sometimes attributed to the Buddha himself. You can search the whole world over for someone more deserving of your love than yourself. You will not find that person anywhere. This is the heart of self-kindness. The one most in need of our welcome is the one inside our own skin. When fear comes, there is something we can offer it. We can offer our presence. We can sit with it, as the woman sat with the small girl. We do not have to fix it or to make it go away. We only have to be there with it, with the steady warmth of someone who has decided, after a long absence, to come home. Beneath all the various techniques and methods of working with what arises, there is one simple movement at the heart of the Buddha's teaching on fear. The movement of turning toward what is here with kindness and saying, "I am with you. We will be all right." This is something that takes practice. It does not come naturally the first time, or even the 10th time. The mind has been pushing fear away for so long that the gesture of welcome can feel strange at first, awkward, even slightly embarrassing. But each time we try it, even imperfectly, something begins to settle. The frightened part of us, which has been so used to being shut out, slowly learns that it is safe to come into the room. And when it does, the room is bigger and warmer than it has ever been. Let us take a slow breath together. Let the heart soften. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a kind of worry that arises in us without any real cause. It comes simply because worrying has become a habit of the mind. Worry, in the end, is the everyday face of fear. It is fear, dressed in ordinary clothes, paying its small visits all day long. The thoughts run in the same circles they have run in for years. The body tightens in its old familiar way, and we find ourselves worried, without quite knowing what about, casting around for something to give the worry a name. You may have noticed this in your own life. A morning begins with a vague uneasiness, and the mind reaches for something to attach the feeling to. The bill that needs paying. The conversation that did not quite go well yesterday. The small task on the list that you have not begun. None of these things were troubling you yesterday in this same way. But this morning the worry was already in the body when you woke. The thoughts only arrived to give it a story. Chronic worry has a strange truth to it. It often arrives before its subject. The body has learned to be tense. The mind has learned to scan for trouble. And by the time we are looking around for what is wrong, we have already been worrying for a while, without quite knowing it. Some people wake every morning this way. Others find that the worry comes in the evening, just as they sit down to rest. Still others know it in the silent hours of the night, when sleep does not come. The pattern is different for each person, but the feeling is much the same. A sense of unease that seems to belong to no particular thing, and to all things at once. The Buddha understood this very well. He saw that the mind can fall into grooves, much as an old path through a forest becomes deeper and deeper with every footfall. The more we walk a certain path of thought, the easier it becomes to walk it again. After many years of worrying, the mind finds the groove of worry without our consent. It is simply where the mind goes when no one is steering. Not all of our fear is about anything in particular. Some of it is the wear of long habit, Once we see this clearly, we can begin to do something quite different about it. Where does this groove come from? The Buddha pointed his students towards something they did not expect. He pointed toward the inner climate of the heart. He noticed that the people who suffered most from chronic worry were often the people who were also hardest on themselves. They judged themselves often. They held themselves to standards no one could meet. There was a small, sharp voice inside them that was always finding fault. And in that inner climate of harshness, worry grew very well. Just as some plants take root only in dry, rocky soil, this kind of worry takes root most easily in a hard inner climate. This is a teaching that has been confirmed many times in the long Buddhist tradition. An unkind heart toward oneself is the ground that anxious worry grows in. The voice that says, "You should have done better," all day, every day, eventually becomes the voice that says, "Something terrible is about to happen." They are close cousins, sharing the same harsh quality and the same tightening of the inner space. When the inner climate softens, the worry has less to feed on. The same conditions that made the worry possible become less hospitable to it. The plant cannot grow without the soil, and we can change the soil. There is something freeing in this understanding. We do not have to chase down every individual worry. We can change the climate in which worries arise, and the climate changes through kindness toward ourselves. An old tale tells of a woman who ran a small inn at the foot of a hill. She had run it for many years and was known throughout the area as a kind hostess. Her guests felt welcomed. Her cooking was good. Her rooms were always tidy. But few people knew that, inside herself, she had been a worrier all her life. Each morning when she woke, the worry was already there in her chest. About the inn, about the cooking, about whether the next guest would be satisfied, about whether she had done enough that day, or had been kind enough, or had remembered everything she needed to remember. The worries changed, but the worrying did not. By the time her head touched the pillow at night, she was tired from a long day of carrying it. She did not know any other way to be. She thought this was simply how she was made. She thought that some people were calm by nature, and that she was not one of them. One spring, a young girl came to the inn looking for work. She was perhaps 14, eager but very nervous. The woman, taking a kindly interest in her, agreed to take her on as a helper. The girl would do small tasks around the inn, and in return she would have a room and food. The girl was eager but inexperienced. She made many small mistakes in her first weeks. She broke a cup. She forgot to bring out the bread for breakfast. She let the fire go out in the main hall. But the woman, to her own surprise, found that she was kind to the girl. Each time the girl made a small mistake, the woman would smile and say something warm. "It is all right," she would say. "You are learning. There is nothing to worry about. We will fix it together." The girl, who had been very nervous when she first came, slowly began to relax. She made fewer mistakes as the weeks passed, and the ones she did make no longer frightened her. One evening, after the girl had broken a small bowl and gone to bed weeping, the woman sat alone in the kitchen, gathering the pieces. She had gone up to the girl's room first and told her, "It is only a bowl. There are other bowls. You are not in any trouble. Go to sleep and do not let it trouble you." The girl had nodded, and her tears had eased, and she had fallen asleep. Now the woman sat with the broken pieces in her lap, and something in her heart turned over. She heard, very clearly, the kind voice she had just used with the girl. and she heard, almost at the same time, the voice she usually used with herself. They could not have been more different. When she made a small mistake of her own, she did not say, "It is all right. You are learning." She said, "You should have known better. You are careless. You are going to ruin everything." When she lay awake at night worrying, she did not soothe herself the way she had just soothed the girl. She added to her worry by judging herself for worrying. She sat there for a long time, with the pieces of the bowl in her hands. She had been kinder to a stranger's child than she had ever been to herself. In the days that followed, she began to try something new. When she caught herself being harsh in her own mind, she would pause. She would put a hand on her chest, and she would say to herself, in her mind, the kind of thing she had said to the girl. "It is all right. You are doing your best. There is nothing wrong with you." It felt strange to her at first. She did not believe the words for some time, but she kept saying them, and she meant them a little more each time. And slowly, very slowly, the climate inside her began to change. The worry did not vanish all at once. It grew softer. The nights became longer with rest and shorter with worry. The mornings began with less weight in her chest. She had not changed anything in her life. The inn was the same. The seasons were the same. The guests came and went as they always had. Only the voice inside her had changed. And that, she discovered, had changed everything. Her guests began to notice too, though they could not always say what was different. The inn was as it had always been. The rooms were as tidy, the cooking as fine. But the woman who served them had a stillness about her that had not been there before. Some of them, leaving in the morning, found themselves carrying a small bit of that stillness with them on the road. They did not know how she had come by it. They only knew that being near her had been good for the heart. Many years later, when the girl was grown and ran her own inn nearby, she would tell people, "The kindness she taught me, she had to learn herself. We grew, both of us, under the same roof." This is at the heart of what the Buddha understood about anxious worry. It is not always about what we think it is about. Sometimes it is about how we have been holding ourselves. When we are kind to ourselves, the inner space opens. When we are harsh, it closes. And in the closed space, worry finds room to spread. In the open space, worry has less to grow on. This is why the Buddha placed such importance on metta toward oneself. He saw that without this, the inner climate could not soften. And without the softening of the climate, no amount of working with individual worries would bring lasting peace. The Buddha saw self-kindness as the very foundation of inner ease. Without it, no method of working with worry could fully take root. With it, even simple ways became surprisingly powerful. When worry has been with us for a long time, the inner space has often grown small. The mind feels cramped. The body feels tight. There is no room to move, even in our own thoughts. The Buddha taught that this can be helped, not by trying to push the worry out, but by quietly making more room. We can let our gaze rest on something open, like the sky, or a distant horizon, or the high ceiling of a temple. Listening to the sounds around us, with a wide rather than a narrow attention, can also help. Stepping outside for a moment into open air is another way. Each of these things invites a little more space into the mind. When the space opens, the groove of worry has less to grip. It is still there, but it is no longer the only thing in the room. Around it, there is now sky and sound and breath and the soft warmth of self-kindness. The worry, slowly, becomes one thing among many, rather than everything. The Buddhist path points to something deep here. We are not the small, tight world that worry would have us believe we are. We are the wide space in which all of this is arising. The worry, the breath, the body, the sounds of the room, the slow turning of the day, all of it is happening inside something much larger than the worry itself. And resting in that larger space, even for a moment, is what the Buddha pointed to as peace. A peace that does not depend on the absence of all that arises, but on the deep room in which it is all welcome. Settle here for just a moment. Feel where you are. Let your breath go where it wants to go. When you are ready, we will continue on together. Some of our deepest fears rest on quiet assumptions we have never examined. We carry them with us for years. We believe them without question. And in the believing, we let them shape choice after choice until we hardly remember that we are the ones doing the believing. A fear that goes unexamined is a fear that grows on its own. It feeds on what we have not looked at. A fear that we are willing to study with patience and care often turns out to be much smaller than we thought. The Buddha taught his students to do this kind of looking. He invited them to ask, of any fear that arose in them, what was actually being believed? What story was the mind telling? What assumptions sat underneath it? Were those assumptions even true? He did not ask them to be braver. He asked them to be more curious. This kind of curiosity is one of the kindest things we can offer ourselves. Most of us have lived with our fears for so long that we have stopped looking at them. They have become part of the landscape. We work around them. We bow to them. We allow them to shape our days. But when we finally turn and look, with patient attention, what we find is often surprising. Many of our fears, examined closely, rest on beliefs that do not survive a second look. The Buddha gave his students a simple way of doing this. When a fear arose, they were to follow the thought to its end. Instead of pushing it away or soothing it, they were to let it speak, to let it tell its whole story, and then to ask, with kindness, so what if? If the mind said, I might fail at this, the student was to ask, and so what if I do? If the mind said, others might think badly of me, the question was, and so what if they do? If the mind said, I might be uncomfortable, the question was, and so what if I am? This is not a harsh practice. It is a kind one. The mind, when it is afraid, runs ahead to terrible conclusions without ever finishing its own sentences. Asking so what if invites the mind to finish what it has started, to say out loud what it has been hinting at. What often happens when the mind reaches the end of its own sentence is surprising. The fear shrinks. The thing that seems so terrible, when followed through to its conclusion, is often not so terrible after all. It is difficult, perhaps. It is unwelcome, but it is bearable. The dread that came with not knowing was larger than the thing itself. This was something the Buddha pointed to again and again. So much of our suffering is the suffering of not finishing the thought. We carry around half-formed fears like small clouds in the chest. We never let them rain, and so they hang there, dark and threatening for years. Imagine an old farmer who lived at the edge of a wide valley. He had grown wheat there for many years on a small piece of land that had been in his family for generations. The land was good, but the weather was not always kind. Some seasons were dry. Some seasons were wet. Some years the harvest was generous. Other years it was thin. The farmer was a warrior. He had always been a warrior. Each spring, when the time came to plant, his old fears would rise up in him. What if the rains do not come this year? What if the wheat does not grow? What if the harvest is poor? He would walk his fields with his heart tight, and his sleep grew short, and his temper grew sharp with his family. One year, a wandering Buddhist monk passed through his village and stayed at the small temple for a few weeks. The farmer, hearing that the monk was wise, went to see him one evening. He sat across from the monk and told him about his fears. The dry seasons, the wet seasons, the years when the wheat had been thin, the tightness in his stomach each spring as the planting began. The monk listened patiently. When the farmer was finished, he asked, "And in your life so far, my friend, has the harvest ever completely failed? Have you ever had no wheat at all?" The farmer thought. "No," he said slowly. "Some years were poor, but never nothing. And in the poor years, did your family go hungry?" The farmer thought again. "No, we have always had enough to eat. We have neighbors. We have stores. We have always managed." "And so, what would happen," the monk asked, "if this year's harvest were poor?" The farmer paused. He had never followed the thought that far. He had spent so many springs in fear of a poor harvest, and never once asked what a poor harvest would actually mean. "It would mean a leaner winter," he said at last. "We would eat less. We would lean on our neighbors. We would buy less cloth. But we would be all right." "And so what would happen if the harvest were very poor?" The farmer paused longer. "We would lean on our neighbors more. We would borrow against the next year. It would be a harder time, but we would be all right." "And so, what would happen if it failed entirely?" The farmer was silent for a long moment. He let himself, for the first time in his life, picture this. Then he said, "We would go to my brother's village for the winter. He has always told us we are welcome. We would help him with his work in return for shelter. We would come back in the spring and plant again. It would be hard, but we would be all right." The monk smiled. "So in every case, you would be all right?" "Yes," said the farmer slowly. "Yes, in every case, we would be all right." "And yet," said the monk, "for many years you have walked your fields each spring in great fear, as though the worst possible thing would also be the end of everything. But the end of everything is not what you described to me just now. What you described, in every case, was a difficult time, followed by your family being all right. That is a very different thing from the end of everything. Is it not?" The farmer nodded. He had not seen it before. He had not let himself see it before. He walked home that night with a lightness he had not known in many years. The next spring, when the planting began and the old fear started to rise in him, he stopped and he asked himself, "So what if the harvest is poor?" And he heard the answer he had given the monk. We would be all right. We would always, in some form, be all right. The fear did not vanish all at once. He had carried it too long for that. But each year he asked the question, and each year the fear was a little smaller. And in time he became a calmer farmer, and a calmer father, and a calmer husband. He still loved his fields. He simply no longer feared them. This same kind of cascade can happen at any age and in any life. Picture a young student in an ancient city, preparing for the great examination that would determine his next steps. In the months leading up to the exam, his mind would race away from him. If I do not pass this exam, he would think, I will not be accepted into the higher studies. If I am not accepted into the higher studies, I will not find good work. If I do not find good work, my family will be ashamed of me. If my family is ashamed, I will lose them, and I will be alone in the world. He would think this way each night, lying awake, until the imagined disaster grew so large he could hardly breathe. His old grandmother, who knew him well, saw the worry on his face one morning. She asked him what was troubling him, and he told her his cascade of thoughts. She listened patiently. Then she said, with great kindness, "So what if you do not pass the exam, my dear?" He stared at her. He had never been asked this question. He had assumed the failure itself was the end of everything. He thought for a long moment. "I would take the exam again next year," he said slowly. "And if you did not pass it then, I would take it again. Or I would find another path. There are many roads in this city. And if your family were disappointed, they would be disappointed for a while. They would still love me. They always have." His grandmother smiled. "You see, the disaster lived only in your mind. In the actual world there is room to fail and still be all right. There is always more road. There is always more love. There is always another year. The terrible cascade was a dream you were dreaming with your eyes open." The young student took the exam. He passed it, in fact. But what stayed with him for the rest of his life was not the passing of the exam. It was his grandmother's kind question and the discovery, in himself, that the world had room for him whether he passed or did not. The so what if question reaches into the heart of how the mind makes fear. Most of our fears are not about what would actually happen. They are about an imagined disaster the mind never quite spells out. As long as the disaster stays vague, it can grow enormous. The moment we follow it through to its end, with patient honesty, it begins to shrink. This is true of so many fears, large and small. So what if I am late to the gathering? People will be a little disappointed, perhaps, and then they will get on with the evening. So what if I make a mistake at my work? It will be uncomfortable, it will be addressed, life will continue. And so what if someone does not like me? Many people will still like me. The world will not end. There is great relief in following the thought through to its conclusion. The relief of seeing that what we feared, when actually examined, is something we could survive. We have always survived hard things. We have managed. We have come out the other side, sometimes with new strength, often with new understanding, almost never as broken as we feared we might be. The Buddha had a great trust in the human heart's ability to meet what comes. He did not promise his students that no difficulty would come. He promised them something more useful. He promised them that whatever came, they could meet it. And his question, when fear arose, was not, "How do I make this go away?" but, "What would actually happen if this came to pass?" So when fear arises in you, you might try with kindness, to follow the thought to its end. Rather than arguing with it or pushing it away, let it speak its whole sentence, and then ask, gently, so what if? The answer is so often the answer the farmer gave. We would be all right. We would always, in some form, be all right. Stay here a moment. Notice the rhythm of your breathing. Let yourself be here, where you are. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a kind of hunger in many of us that we may not have noticed clearly. It is the hunger for approval, the longing to be praised, to be liked, to be thought well of by others. This hunger lives in almost every human heart. It is not a flaw, but it can run our lives without our consent if we do not see it clearly. When this hunger is strong, fear becomes its companion. We fear the disapproval of others. We fear being seen poorly. We fear being misunderstood. We rehearse what we will say so that we will be received well. We tighten when we are corrected. When others do not seem to notice us, we go quiet. Our well-being rises and falls with the moods of those around us, and we hardly know that this is happening. The Buddha looked at this with great care. He saw that almost every person he met carried this hunger. He saw too that it had no end. No amount of praise from outside could ever fill it for long. As soon as one moment of approval passed, the hunger returned. The next compliment was needed. The next nod of approval. The cycle did not stop. You may have seen this in your own life. A kind word from someone we admire can light us up for the rest of the day, and then by evening, we are already wondering whether they really meant it. A cool look from a stranger can settle in the chest for hours, replaying itself until we hardly remember the rest of the day. A piece of work that we were proud of in the morning can feel small and disappointing by night if no one has remarked on it. The mood inside us moves with the weather of other people, and the weather of other people is, by its nature, always changing. He came to understand that the hunger had no end because it was looking in the wrong direction. It was looking outside, when the food it needed was inside. There was an inner source of well-being that, once tended, could fill what no amount of outside praise ever would. The Buddha called this inner source the cultivation of qualities. He gave his students many lists of these: generosity, loving kindness, patience, compassion, attentive presence, joy in the good fortune of others, steadiness in the face of difficulty, wise reflection. These were not virtues to perform for show. They were inner resources, deepening with use, that built something in the person which could not be taken away. Each of these qualities, the Buddha taught, is like a small spring of fresh water. The more we tend them, the more they flow. Together, they form a reservoir deep inside us that we can draw on in any season. When the praise of others is generous, we are not lifted into pride because we already have what we need. When the praise of others runs dry, we are not destroyed because we have not been depending on it. In the Buddhist understanding of a peaceful life, the well-being that depends on others is fragile. The well-being that comes from within, from qualities patiently cultivated over years, is unshakable. We can think of it like this. Imagine 2 homes. One has no well of its own. Each day the person who lives there must walk to the river to fetch water. If the river is high, all is well. If the river runs low, the person grows desperate. They live always with one eye on the river. The other home has a deep well in the courtyard. The person who lives there draws water each morning from her own well. The river may rise or fall. She is unconcerned. Her water is always there. This is the difference the Buddha taught between a life lived from outside approval and a life lived from inner cultivation. Both people drink water, but only one is free. Let us explore a story about a potter who lived in an ancient town, in a small workshop near the market. He was a fine craftsman, and his bowls were admired throughout the region. People came from far away to buy them, but the potter was rarely at peace. When a buyer praised his work, he felt lifted, happy, almost weightless for a few hours. When a buyer made a critical remark, even a small one, he sank. He would spend the rest of the day in a low mood, going over the words in his mind, certain that something must be wrong with him or his craft. He thought this was simply the nature of being a craftsman. He believed his happiness was tied to the response of others, and that there was no other way. One spring, a Buddhist nun came through the town on a long journey. She stopped at his workshop to buy a small bowl for her travels. She watched him work for a few minutes before choosing one. He showed her several. She selected a simple, plain bowl with no decoration. He was surprised. "The painted ones are more beautiful," he said. She smiled. "This one is honest," she said. "I can see the love you put into its shape. The painted ones tell me about your skill. This one tells me about your heart." The potter was quiet for a moment. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. As she paid him, he asked, on impulse, if she could stay for some tea. He had questions. She agreed, and they sat together in the small back room of his workshop. He told her about the swings of his mood, how a small praise lifted him for hours, how a small criticism sank him for a day, how he could not seem to be at peace with his own work, no matter how well it sold. The nun listened with kindness. When he had finished, she asked, "Tell me, my friend, when you shape a bowl, what do you love about it?" The potter thought, "I love the moment when the clay rises under my hands. I love the feeling of a curve becoming right. I love when the form finds itself. And when you are doing those things, where is the buyer? Where is the praise?" He paused. There is no buyer. There is no praise. There is only the work. And how do you feel in those moments? I feel. He paused again, searching. I feel at home. I feel still. I feel like myself. The nun nodded. That is your true reward, my friend. It is already in you, every time you make a bowl. The praise of others comes after. It is pleasant, but it is not where your peace lives. Your peace lives in the moment of the clay rising. You have it whenever you work. You have lost sight of it because you have been listening all your life to the wrong music. She placed her small payment into his hand. Each time you shape a bowl, notice where your peace is. Notice that it has nothing to do with what anyone will think when they see it later. The peace is already yours in the doing. You only have to remember it. She bowed and continued on her journey. The potter sat for a long time after she had gone. The next morning, when he sat down to his wheel, he tried what she had said. He let his mind settle on the clay, on the rise of the form, on the feel of the curve under his fingers, He stopped imagining the buyer who would come later. He stopped rehearsing the praise he hoped to receive. He found, to his surprise, that the work was deeply satisfying in a way he had not let himself feel for many years. The bowl rose, and it was his own simple joy. When a buyer came later and praised it, he was glad, but he no longer needed the praise to know that he had done well. He had known it already in the making. In the years that followed, the potter became known not only for his bowls, but for the calm that surrounded him in his small workshop. People said it was a peaceful place to visit. The potter would smile and continue with his work, knowing that the peace they felt was the peace he had finally found inside himself. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he taught about the cultivation of inner qualities. The potter had been working all his life, but he had been giving away the reward of his work to the future, to the buyer, to the response of others. When he learned to keep the reward in the present moment, in the doing itself, his life changed without his circumstances changing. This is true of many parts of our lives. The reward is often closer than we think. We do not need to wait to be approved of, to be seen, to be praised, in order to know the peace that is already in the doing. The peace is built right into the action, if we will pay attention to it. The Buddha understood that the qualities we cultivate inside ourselves are what make us less dependent on what happens outside. When we tend these inner qualities, the future tends to take care of itself. We are no longer waiting for circumstances to change before we can be happy. We are already, in this moment, drawing water from our own well. There is one more teaching here that the Buddha returned to often. We take care of the future by how we meet the present. If we meet the present with kindness and attention, the future tends to soften. If we meet it with grasping and fear, the future tends to be hard. The way we are now is the seed of what comes later. If we plant kindness, attention, patience, and care today, the harvest in the days ahead is most often these same qualities returning to us. This is why the Buddha was not anxious about the future. He had built the reservoir. He knew that whatever came, he would meet it with the qualities he had cultivated. And he taught his students that they could do the same, one quality at a time, over the long years of a life. There is great peace in understanding this. Most of us spend a great deal of energy worrying about what is to come, and we forget that the future is being shaped, right now, by who we are choosing to be. Each small act of kindness is a deposit in the reservoir. Each moment of patience, of attention, of honest care, adds something to the inner well. Over the years, without our quite noticing, these moments build a person who can meet what arrives with grace. The worry about the future thins, not because the future has become certain, but because we have become ready for it. And the fear that once ran beneath everything begins to lose its old grip, because we are no longer waiting outside ourselves for the thing that has been here, in our own depths, all along. This is the great inheritance the Buddha offered to anyone willing to receive it. A life in which we no longer beg the world for our well-being. A life in which the well is our own. Rest for a moment now. Feel the breath in your chest. Notice that, in this moment, all is well. When you are ready, we will continue together. Fear, the Buddha taught, does not simply react to the world. It shapes the world we see. This is not easy to take in at first. We are used to thinking that there are things out there, and that we look at them, and that our fear or our peace is a response to what we see. But the Buddha pointed to something more subtle. The mind that is looking is not separate from the thing being looked at. The mood we are in, the fear we are carrying, the assumptions we hold, all of these reach out and shape what we see before we ever know we are doing the shaping. In Buddhism, this is one of the central insights. We rarely see things as they truly are. We see them through the mind that is looking. A frightened mind sees a frightening world. A peaceful mind sees a peaceful world. The world itself is not what changed. The looking changed. Once this is understood, even a little, something profound begins to happen. The fear we have lived with begins to lose some of its old authority. It is no longer simply telling us about the world. It is also telling us about itself. For so much of our lives, we have taken what fear shows us as a true report on the world. We have braced ourselves accordingly. We have made choices, lived years, even shaped our identities around what fear once revealed to us. To see that fear has been, all this time, a kind of painter as much as a witness, is to feel the ground shift slightly under our feet. Many things we thought were the world turn out to have been the world, plus our own fear, mixed together so thoroughly that we never noticed where one ended and the other began. You may have seen this in your own life, if you look back honestly. There have been days when everything felt threatening. The same familiar streets, the same friends, the same usual objects, all of them somehow tinged with worry. There have been other days when everything felt at ease. Nothing was different in the world. The mood of the one doing the looking was different. The Buddha taught his students to notice this carefully. He invited them to ask, whenever fear was strong, how much of what I am seeing right now is actually here, and how much is the fear coloring what I see? He saw that almost always, a great deal of what frightened people was being shaped by the fear itself. This shows up in small ways and large. A loved one's silence becomes evidence of anger, when in truth, they are only tired. A small ache becomes evidence of serious illness, when in truth, it is only a small ache. A neighbor's brief nod becomes evidence of dislike, when in truth they were thinking of something else entirely. In each case, the fear is reaching out from inside us and adding meaning to what we see. We are not just observing, we are also painting. So much of our fear is not about the world. It is about how the world looks when we look at it through fear. Change the one doing the looking, and the world begins to change too. Picture a man who lived in an ancient village near a range of low hills. One evening, he had stayed late at a neighboring village helping with work, and the sun had begun to set by the time he started for home. The path led up through the hills, between great rocks and stands of old trees. He had been told, more than once, that wild creatures sometimes wandered the hills at twilight. As he walked, the light grew dim and the shadows grew long. Every small sound made his heart jump. Every rustle of leaves became, in his mind, something moving toward him. As he came around a bend in the path, he stopped suddenly. Ahead of him, in the half-dark, he saw a great shape crouched across the path. It was low and dark and very still. To his fear-quickened eyes, it had the look of an enormous animal waiting for him to pass. He froze. His heart pounded. He thought of running back to the neighboring village, but it was too far now. He thought of trying to slip past through the trees, but the trees were thick on either side. He stood there, hardly breathing, for what felt like a very long time. The shape did not move. After a while, he noticed something strange. A creature waiting to do harm would have made some movement by now. A slight shift, a breath, something. But the shape was perfectly still. Not the stillness of a hunter, but the stillness of an object. His mind began to question what his eyes had told him. Slowly, he took one small step forward. The shape did not move. He took another, then another. With each step, the shape stayed exactly as it was. As he came closer, the failing light shifted, and the shape began to change. What he had thought was a great crouching animal was a fallen tree. It had come down across the path, probably in the last storm. The branches at one end had looked like a lowered head. The trunk had looked like a great curved back. In the half-light, with his mind already full of fear of wild creatures, his eyes had built the beast from those few honest pieces of wood. He laughed out loud in the dim hills. He sat down on the fallen tree itself and caught his breath. He stayed there for a long while, looking at the tree that he had been so certain was a beast. When at last he rose and began the rest of his walk home, he noticed that the hills around him looked different. The same shadows were there, the same dim light. But his steps were lighter, and his breath came more easily, and the small rustlings in the brush no longer became creatures in his mind. The hills had not changed. Only his looking had changed. And in changing, it had changed the hills as much as if they had been remade. What stayed with him from that evening, for the rest of his life, was not the relief of finding the tree. It was the realization of what his fear had done. He had not merely imagined a beast. He had seen one. The shape, the menace, the very details of it, all of it had been there, in his eyes, made real by the fear he was carrying. The fear had not been only a reaction. It had been a maker of what he saw. In the years that followed, whenever he found himself afraid, he would remember the fallen tree on the path. And he would ask himself, with great kindness, what am I seeing right now? And how much of it is my fear painting over what is actually here? Many times, the asking alone was enough. The beast in the path would soften back into the tree it had always been. This is the entry into the Buddhist teaching of emptiness. The word can sound cold or strange when first heard, but what it points to is something warm and freeing. Emptiness, in Buddhism, does not mean that nothing is there. It means that what we see does not have a fixed, solid, unchanging reality of its own. It is always shaped by the mind that is seeing. The Buddha taught that this is true not only of objects in the world. It is true of the past. It is true of the future. It is true of the present moment itself. None of these has the fixed, independent reality we usually grant them. Each is shaped by the mind that is meeting it. We have all felt this with the past. A memory from earlier in life seems painful in one mood, sweet in another. The same events appear in different colors depending on how we are today. The past is not fixed. It moves with how we are looking at it. The future, in the same way, is shaped by the mind that imagines it. A future imagined by a frightened mind is full of disasters. A future imagined by a peaceful mind is full of possibility. The future has not yet happened. It exists only as a picture the mind is painting, and the mind paints with the colors it currently holds. And the present, the Buddha pointed out, is no different. The moment we are in right now is being shaped by the looking that is meeting it. Change the looking, and the moment changes too. This is not an abstract idea, meant only for philosophers. It is a practical insight that touches every moment of a life. If we wake in a tight, frightened mood, the morning is tight and frightened. If we wake in a soft, open mood, the same morning is soft and open. The cup of tea on the table, the light through the window, the voices in the next room, none of these are fixed. They wait for the mind that will meet them, and they show themselves accordingly. The mind that has practiced kindness, attention, and ease meets the world differently than the mind that has lived in fear. And the world, ever so slightly, meets it back. This is a startling discovery when it begins to land. The whole world that fear tells us about is not the solid, fixed, terrible place fear claims it to be. It is something far softer, something far more open, something that depends, in great measure, on the eyes through which it is seen. In the Zen tradition, this is sometimes spoken of as the mind being a mirror. The mirror reflects whatever is placed before it. A frightened mirror reflects a frightened world. A clear mirror reflects whatever is here, just as it is. The work of practice, the old Zen teachers said, is to slowly clear the mirror so that what we see is closer to what is actually there. Once this is understood, even a little, fear cannot be believed in quite the same way. We can still feel fear. It still arises. But underneath the feeling, there is now a steady knowing. The world the fear is telling us about is not all there is. There is also the tree on the path, the world as it would look from a calmer mind, the world as it will look tomorrow when this fear has passed. These are equally real. The fear is no longer a final report on reality. It is one painting among many. We can see it for what it is. We do not have to live inside it as though it were the only true picture. This is a deep kind of freedom. It does not require us to stop feeling fear. It only requires us to remember, when fear comes, that fear is also a painter, and that what fear paints is not the only thing that is here. The Buddha called this kind of seeing wisdom. He placed it at the very heart of his teaching. He saw that without it, even the most patient practice of kindness, the most steady cultivation of qualities, could only go so far. With it, all of these took on a new lightness. The frightening world began to look, more and more, like the wide and shifting world it actually is. And we, the ones doing the seeing, began to take ourselves a little less seriously as victims of what we saw. So when fear comes, in the days and nights ahead, you may remember this. The world fear is showing you is one painting. There are many paintings. There is the world as you would see it from your kindest hour. There is the world as you will see it in the morning. The fear is real, but it is not the whole truth. It never has been. And the heart that knows this, even in small ways, is a heart on its way to a deep and lasting freedom. What the Buddha pointed us back to is the one place where freedom can truly be found, which is inside the looking itself. The world will go on being what it is, with its joys and its difficulties. But the eyes that meet it can grow softer, clearer, less frightened, more open. As they do, the world they reveal becomes less and less the world that fear once told us about, and more, the wide, alive, ever-changing thing it has always been. There is great rest in this understanding. We are no longer at war with the world that fear used to show us, because we know now that the world fear showed us was always partly our own creation. We can lay down the war. We can sit, with kindness, in the presence of whatever is here, and know that what is here is shaped, in part, by the one who is sitting. And that, in itself, is a great inheritance to receive. Stay here for a moment of stillness. Feel the soft weight of the body. Let the breath move on its own. There is nothing to grasp and nothing to do. When you are ready, we will go on together. We have traveled together through many slow hours tonight. In all of these stories, the voice of the Buddha has been quietly with us. He has taught us that fear is universal and workable, that it can be met with kindness rather than fought, that it loses its hold when we welcome it instead of pushing it away, that it shrinks when we examine its old assumptions, and that, in the end, it dissolves as we see how it shapes the very world we look upon. Whatever fear has walked with you tonight, may it find a little more space inside you. May the heart open just a little. May the world look a little wider in the morning. These teachings are old, and they have helped many people across many centuries. They are here for us too, in our own hour, with our own particular cares. They ask nothing of us but our willingness to listen. The path the Buddha taught is a simple one. It is less a set of techniques than a slow turning toward what is already here. The fear we carry, the warmth we feel, the breath that moves in us without our help, all of this is the field in which the teaching grows. We do not need to become someone different. We do not need to climb to anywhere special. We only need to meet what we already are with steady attention and patient kindness. The truth has been here all along, waiting for us to notice. Tomorrow, when the small worries of the day begin to gather, something of this evening may stay with you. A breath remembered, a moment of softening before the body has tightened, a noticing, when the harsh inner voice begins, that there is another way to speak to ourselves. These are simple acts of remembering, the kind that change a life slowly, almost without our knowing. The Buddha said that even a single moment of awareness has its own steady weight. Many such moments, gathered over time, become a different way of being. What you carry now will not always be carried. The cares of this evening will pass. New cares will arise. The seasons turn in our lives as they turn in the natural world. Nothing stays. And in that very impermanence, the Buddha pointed to a great freedom. We do not have to hold what is here too tightly. We do not have to fear that what we do not yet have will never come. Everything moves. Everything changes. And in the very midst of all that changing, there is something still and aware in us that does not change, that has been watching all of this from the beginning. In sitting with these teachings, you have joined a long line of people who have done the same. Countless men and women, for thousands of years, have turned their attention toward fear in just this way. Some sat in monasteries. Some sat in their homes, between the work of an ordinary day. Many sat in difficult times, with much weighing on them. Their hearts trembled, as your heart may have trembled. Their hearts also softened, in time. They were not different from you. They found, as you may find, that meeting fear with steady kindness gradually loosens what once seemed unbreakable. You are not alone in this. The path is well worn beneath your feet. For now, let the day go. Let the worries that came with it rest where they are. Whatever is unfinished will keep until morning. Whatever is troubling will be held by something larger than worry while you rest. The Buddha trusted his students to receive the night with the same kindness he taught them to bring to the day. There is nothing to do now, no fear to solve, no thought to finish. There is only the breath and the soft weight of the body and the room around you and the wide stillness beneath everything. Rest now. Let everything be as it is. Sleep well